guys. It's good to see you again, even if it's virtual. I'm really excited about the next 4 weeks. We're going to be talking about an exciting topic. But before we get started, I want you to look at the things that are all scattered around my table here and see if you can figure out what they all have in common. So I have a newspaper. I have a telephone. I have a letter or a bill or something like that. That's what we get in the mail. Birthday card. I've got an alarm clock. And I have a map. And one other thing here, I have the Bible. So what do you think all of these things have in common? Take a minute to think about it. We'll be right back. So did you figure out what it was? Yeah, they're all different methods of communication. Now, after I packed this big heavy bag full of that stuff, I thought, well, that was silly. I could have just brought my cell phone because I have all those things on my cell phone too. I have an alarm clock. I have a way of sending a birthday greeting. I can find a map. I can find the Bible. You even get bills on your email sometimes, right? So everything is on the cell phone. This would have been a lot easier to carry. But live and learn, right? So anyways, this is what we're going to talk about is communication, and communication specifically in prayer. So before we go into the prayer aspect of it, I want to give you an example of how important communication is. Now, this might get really exciting. What if your dad called a family meeting, or your mom or your aunt or your uncle and said, okay, everybody needs to gather at the dinner table at 5 o'clock and we're going to talk about something really exciting. Can you guess what it is? What would you hope it would be? Well, this example is taking us on a trip to Disneyland. Wow, that would be exciting right now, especially since it's been so long since we've been able to do anything really fun. So, what kind of questions do you think would come up in this communication meeting that you have with your family? How are we going to get there? No, probably the first question would be, when? When are we going? And then it might be, how are we going to get there? Or, who's coming? What day do we leave? And what am I supposed to pack? Is it going to be warm? Is it going to be, do I need a sweater? Do I need my shorts? Do I need my bathing suit? And you start getting really excited. And you have this meeting and you talk about all the details. And maybe you find out that you're going to drive there. Well, then it's like, well, how long is it going to take if we have to go by car? Can't we go by airplane? And then you got to figure out, if you go by airplane, you got to get a ticket. And then you got to figure out a way to get to the airport. And then when you get to California, you got to figure out how you're going to get from the airport to Disneyland. And what about where are you going to stay? Did somebody make a reservations for a hotel? What hotel is it going to be? There's all kinds of questions that you have to ask and details that you have to plan in order to make this trip to Disneyland a success and something that you can really have fun and anticipate. And you know, the good thing is that these questions all are being communicated and asked to people that you love and you trust. The people that are planning this trip with you, your mom and your dad, your sisters and your brothers, you know them really well. You know they wouldn't just be tricking you or not giving you something that you could look forward to. And you have a responsibility to really communicate with each other, your dreams and your goals, and maybe you might even have some jobs. You might have to pack your own suitcase. And if you forgot your bathing suit, that's not on your mom and dad. That one's on you. But anyways, it's exciting to plan a trip to Disneyland and exciting to plan something with your family that you know that you can love them, you can trust them, and you can have a good plan that you think is not going to, it's foolproof. Nothing is going to go wrong because mom and dad love me and they want what's best for me, and we're going to have a great time. This is called communication. And let me tell you, communication is way easier to do with somebody that you know and that you trust. Well, we're going to move into the Bible part of the story now because we're going to look at a couple of things about communication and what it is. Can you have any ideas of if somebody asked you, how do you communicate with God? What would you say? Prayer? Perfect. You got it. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking about prayer. And today we're going to be talking about what is prayer. One of the most important things about prayer is who are you going to pray to? And can you trust that person? Can you communicate with that person? How are you going to communicate with that person? How are you going to know what they say to you, and what can you say to them? Just like the questions you were asking your mom and dad, those are good questions to ask about prayer. So the first thing that we want to do is we really want to understand who we're praying to, and that person is God. And one of the best places to figure out how to learn about God and whether we can trust him and what we can say to him is in the Bible. Okay? So the Bible is our greatest communication tool when we're going to be talking to God. And when we read the Bible, we find out who God is. We find out how much he loves us. We find out that he answers prayer, that we can talk to him about anything. And we'll be going through some of those things in our next couple of lessons. But most of all, you want to know that you can trust God and that he's going to give you things that to just give you opportunities to talk to him about anything. And you're going to learn how to listen to God, and it's going to be a wonderful communication tool. Now, we're going to talk about some of those applications to prayer a little bit later on. But right now, I want to remind you of two things. I want to remind you of the story that we talked about with David a couple weeks ago, and how he went from being a shepherd boy to the king of Israel. You know, when he was out there tending his sheep, he did a lot of talking to God. He had quiet. He had the stars shining down on him. He could think about who created those stars. He could think about, what is God like? Does he really hear me? Does he really care about me? And then he could start remembering, wow, I remember when that lion came to attack the sheep, and I was terrified. I prayed to God, and he helped me. And the psalm that we looked at talked about how God led David through to the quiet streams and to quiet meadows, and he took care of everything that he needed in his life. It was a wonderful relationship that he had with God. The second person that we're going to talk about is Daniel. Daniel is somebody that Pastor Isaac's been talking about the last couple of weeks in our big church. And he is another amazing role model of how we can communicate with God. He was just a young man when he got was taken captive in Babylon. And we learned in the lessons of Daniel how he talked to God on a regular basis. If you don't know a lot about Daniel, I'd recommend you read about Daniel. Probably the most famous story about Daniel is Daniel in the lion's den, just because he followed God. And it's an amazing story. It's in Daniel chapter 6. So you can do that on your own with your mom and dad, or you can read it on your own and just find out about how Daniel talked to God when he was in difficult times. What I want to do today is I want to show you how Daniel had a regular routine of talking to God, what kind of questions he asked God, how he could hear God talking back to him. And there's a verse I want to tell you about in Jeremiah 29, verse 13. It says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." David did this, and Daniel did this. I've got a couple of things here right from the book of Daniel. Daniel 1:9, it said that God caused the officials to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. Was God involved in Daniel's life even then? You betcha. God caused these officials to show favor to Daniel. In Daniel 1, verse 17, it said, to these four men were Daniel and his three buddies, God gave knowledge and understanding. So God was involved in their life, giving them all the tools that they needed to be able to do the job that he had called them to. In Daniel 2:18, Daniel urged his friends to plead to God, the God of heaven, for mercy. In other words, pray. So Daniel and his friends prayed for God's mercy because they needed help. The king was going to do some things that were going to be really, really tough, and they needed to pray to God and ask God what they were supposed to do. In Daniel 2, verse 19, it says that during the night, God revealed a mystery to Daniel in a vision. So God spoke back to Daniel. This time it was in a dream, but sometimes it's just in nature. And for us, a lot of times God speaks to us through the Word or through the Bible. And then in verse 20, it said, Daniel praised the God of heaven for answering his prayer. So that's another thing that we can do when we pray to God. We can thank God for the answers that he gives us. In Daniel 2, verse 27, it says that Daniel told the king that no man could interpret the king's dream, but there was a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So because Daniel knew God, he had communicated with God, he trusted God, he had boldness to go before the king and tell him that only God was the only one who could give him the answers. And if you read through Daniel, you'll find out that the Babylonians had a lot of other gods. They were trying to get answers for the king too. They couldn't answer him. Why? Because they weren't praying to the one true God. And then it says in Daniel 2 verse 27, because Daniel acknowledged who God was and God's power, this is how the king responded. Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealers of mysteries. So because Daniel prayed to God and communicated with God on a regular basis, he had boldness to talk to the king about who God was and that he could trust him. And the king said, wow, your God really is the true God, the God and the Lord of kings and the God of gods. And then listen to what the king said next in Daniel 4 verse 2. This is the king talking. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miracles and signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is eternal, his dominion endures from generation to generation. And that was because Daniel kept living out his faith and his trust in God before the king, that the king got to know a little bit about who God was. Now, he had some ups and downs, just like we are. We're not always going to know exactly what God wants us to do, but we need to keep trusting him, and we need to know that he always loves us and wants the very best for us. So what is prayer? Prayer is communicating with God, seeking after God until you find him. Just like Jeremiah 29:13 said, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. David did that. Daniel did that. I'm sure you know a lot of other people who do that. And I'm hoping that that's something will become a pattern in your life as we learn more about prayer over the next couple weeks, that you will seek God with all your heart, and you'll find out that he will answer your prayer, and you can talk to him about anything. I just want to go back really quickly to our trip to Disneyland that we talked about at the beginning. Can you imagine if there was no communication with the hotel to find out if you had a room and you got there and you had no place to stay? You had no way of getting to the airport or getting from the airport to Disneyland. If somebody forgot money to buy food, let's see, what else bad could happen if you didn't communicate? Disneyland might not even be open. That would be horrible. So communication is so important. But the best communication and the best way to start communicating, talk to the people who love you and that you can trust, and you know that they love you and you know that you can trust them. Those are the best people to communicate with. Now, I got one other thing, just one other picture to show you so that you can know how important communication is. Because even though I brought all this stuff and I really only needed to bring my cell phone, there are some things that I can't put on my cell phone. They're just kind of copies of it. They're not the real thing. But I have a stop sign and I have another form of a stop sign. Can you imagine if your mom and dad were driving in California, they didn't really know where they're going because it's a new place, and they didn't stop at a stop sign, or they didn't stop at a red light, or they didn't go when the light was green? Oh my goodness, it would be chaos and it could be dangerous. So these signs that God gives us and these tools that he gives us to communicate are so important. Whether it's when we're out on the road, whether we want to find some place to go on our map, or we want to communicate on our cell phone and talk to people that we love, they're all important tools to communicate. But the most important tool is the Bible, because this is where God communicates to us mostly right now. And the second one, and just as important as that, is communicating through prayer to God. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you an opportunity to make a journal. Okay, I have a journal. I didn't decorate this one, but where did it go underneath all my stuff here? This is my journal. I didn't decorate it. You're going to get one that you can decorate it as nice as you want, or with whatever you like to do in here. But this is where I write a lot of my prayers to God. and I ask him questions. I tell him things that are really bothering me, and I ask him to help me to trust him. And I can go back and I can look at this journal. Sometimes I write down Bible verses that I feel that God is talking to me about. So we're going to give you an opportunity, excuse me, to make a journal so you can start talking to God and communicating with him. And we look forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to talk a little bit more about prayer, and we're going to be talking next week about why we should pray. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.